So now it's time to actually work on the back end to start implementing the functionality that will allow us to log a user out. But before we actually get started working on the code, let's think about what's going to happen here. I'm going to go back to my web browser. So pretend, if you will, that the second user here, John Smith, is actually logged in, and I click on the button to log the user out. Now there is no real challenge to making a fetch statement that calls the backend API and says, delete the token for this user, which effectively logs that user out. But then, of course, the user can just go and log back in and get a new token. Not very helpful. Now, I suppose I could log the user out and very quickly go change the user's password, but it might make sense to actually add something to the user type and the database. So, back in the backend code, let's just add a field right here after the password, and I'll call it active. And it will be an integer, and when the user is active, that value will be 1, and when the user is not active, it'll be 0. So in JSON, I'll call that active. Okay? And let's just save this to format it. So I've added that there. Now I'm going to go back to Beekeeper Studio and add a column to my database. So I'm logged in, and I'll right-click on the users table, view the structure, and I'm going to add a field here. And I'm actually going to call the field user active. Okay? So I think active might be used by standard SQL, and I know user active is not. And it will be of type, say, integer. So let's delete this and put in integer. Okay? And it will not be nullable, and I'll give it a default value of, say, 0. Okay? So let's apply this. Now I've added that column to my database. Perfect. So that means I need to make some additional changes to all of the methods associated with users, which is why normally when you're defining a database structure, you try to get everything right at the beginning. But we don't always get it right at the beginning. So let's go down here, and we'll add to our query after password, we're going to say active, user active, which is what I called it in the database. Okay? And then down here, after password, when I populate my rows, I'll put in ampersand user dot active. Okay? Now while we're at it, what we're really trying to do here with this query getAll is to determine not just whether or not a user is active, but also to determine whether or not that user has a valid token. And that's pretty easy. So I'm going to put a comma after updated at in my query. And give myself a couple of blank lines. And here, I'll put in a case statement, okay? And the case statement is simply, on the next line, when, and then in parentheses, select count ID from tokens T, where user underscore ID is equal to users.id, and that refers to the ID in the users table, okay? And T, that's the tokens table, dot expiry is greater than now, built-in function in Postgres. When all of that is greater than 0, then 1. Okay, next line, else 0, and then end as has token. I can call that whatever I want. So this case statement will say, if I can find at least one token that is valid for the current user ID, in other words, if there's an entry and it hasn't expired, then return 1, otherwise return 0. And that means down here, after updated at, I can simply populate the appropriate field in the tokens that's embedded in the user struct. So user.token.id, and we're done for that part. Now that we have that, let's go back to our database, just to make sure we have everything right here. And now I'm going to look at the contents of the users table. Okay? And I do, in fact, have the necessary column here, but I'm going to make myself, trevor.soller@gmail.com, I'm going to make myself active. And while I'm at it, I may as well make you at there active. Okay? So let's apply those changes. Okay? Now I have 2 active users. Perfect. So let's also make sure that this query works the way that I think it's going to. So I'll copy the entire query and go back to Beekeeper Studio and go to my query, and I'll just paste it in there. Okay, this should all work. Let's run it. And I have, let's see here, has token 1, has token 0. That works perfectly. And the person that has the token is me. Okay, so we know that works. Now this also means that when someone logs in, let's go to our handlers, and let's find the part where someone logs in. We look up the user by email, we validate their password. Okay, we don't want to generate a token if that user is not active. So let's just add a little check here. Make sure user is active. And that's as simple as saying, if user.active is equal to 0, then we'll do the same thing we did here. Just return some JSON with an appropriate error message. And we'll just say user is not active. Okay, so that works there. That's no problem. Now, let's go back to our models.go, and we're going to have to add active to every one of the situations where we're getting users. Okay, so we've done this one. We have active there. Let's go down to the next one, get by email. So after password, we'll put user_active, comma, and after password, we'll put ampersand user.active. Okay, I'm not going to bother getting the token here right now for these ones. We don't need it right now, but we might later, and if we do, we'll add it. So that's get by email. Now get one, same idea. After password, user_active, comma, and after password, ampersand, try that again, ampersand, user.active. And let's go down here, update. We're going to do that one as well, which means we'll have to update the form on the front end, but we'll get there eventually. User_active equals $4, comma, and this becomes a 5. And this becomes a 6. And then down here, after last name, u.active. Okay? Well, let's keep going. Delete is fine. Insert. So after password, I'll put user_active. And down here, I'm going to have to add a $7. And after the password, user.active. I think that's it for that one. And is there anywhere else? Password matches? No. Get by token? No. Get user for token. There we are. So after password, ampersand user.active. And up here, we're going to get user_active. Okay? So get user for token. Generate token is fine. Authenticate token. Yeah, we're going to want to do this one as well. So after we get the user, we're going to want to make sure that the user is actually active. So if user.active is equal to 0, then we'll do the same thing we did here with a different error message. Copy, paste, user not active. And then finally, I think the last change we have to make for now is to go back to our handlers and find the part where we're updating a user. Okay, so that would be edit user right here. We're going to have to add to this u.active is equal to user.active. And again, we're going to have to populate that field on the front end form when we're adding or editing a user. But we'll take care of that when we go back to the front end. In the interim, it seems to me that what we have here so far will at least allow us to update a user's status, their active status, to inactive when we delete their token and log them out from that front end page. Okay, this lecture is getting a little bit long. Let's move on in the next lecture.